do you try to make a statement of self-expression by having red hair?
Because I think not enough people actually try to understand how all these things fit together.
Our graphic designer has a lot of fun with them too.
Can't please anybody these days, huh? My goodness.
GM, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of The Roll Up. Today we have a long-awaited podcast episode with our friend Adrian Brink, co-founder of Anoma. This one is super cool because we are going into the depths of Anoma, which has been building for a really long time and is finally coming to fruition. This one was really fun and I learned a lot. I think you will too. Hope you guys enjoy. Before we get into it, a word from our sponsors. Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fractal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fractal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fractal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fractal mainnet, bridge your tokens, and bring your Frax assets into the Fractal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fractal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity. Cartesia is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesia enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesia.io, that's cartesia.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the roll-up. Today, a conversation around intents, privacy, scaling, many of the topics that we've been covering on the channel. So I think that we'll have a fresh perspective today from Adrian. Adrian, I think we might have met or done a podcast in like 2020 or something. It was so long ago. It might have been at a conference, but
I remember that too. I
definitely
think it was
seeing.
ETH Denver, way back.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember the room. I don't remember which venue or which city that was in, but I remember sitting in a room with you guys.
Your hair was
times.
much more red back then.
Yeah, I mean, okay. This is sort of like it's returning back to natural. For November, it'll be all red again, I think. So just prior to DEF CON, I'll redo it.
Is this like do you try to make a statement of self-expression by having red hair?
And people read way too much into this. So the original story for this is really in 2017. I was at SF Blockchain Week, and for some reason, I think I was wearing a red hoodie, and I was the only, we were like 200 people there. I was the only person with a red hoodie, and then over time, I just kept wearing red hoodies. And at some point, it started getting too warm. So it's like, okay, red hoodies are like not happening anymore. It's way too warm in these venues nowadays. So it's like, let's try the hair. That's really the only story. It worked tremendously well. Like, for some reason, no one has copied this. I have no idea why. I really didn't expect this to like last this long without other people trying to go for other colors.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of back, some years ago in San Francisco, and just kind of your previous work with Tendermint, one of the first core developers, and then also working at the Web3 Foundation, which is that Polkadot? Is that Web3 Foundation? Yeah,
Very
that's what I thought. Nice. So how did you find Tendermint, Polkadot? how did you get interested in kind of validating? Like what was the light bulb moment for you where you were like, okay, like I'm gonna start developing in crypto? Did you have a previous dev background?
So I wrote my grad thesis on censorship resistant e-voting back in 2016. And in
Oh, that's
2016, there was
super
nothing,
interesting.
right? Like there was nothing available. So I built it on Ethereum. So I wrote a couple of smart contracts there and this really came from the idea of the Arab Spring and the Catalan independence movement on like, what does it look like in a world where people can vote independent of central governments, right? That was sort of the basic thesis behind that, behind my grad thesis. So built that and like, I mean, in 2016, we were very few people. We were very few people. Um, so like a lot of these like cool ideas, like PBFT started floating around. I came across I don't actually remember exactly why, but I came across the Tenement paper, the consensus paper during my research for the grad thesis. Ended up really liking the paper. I was like, sounded cool. Uh, Joined the Slack, messaged Jay. I was like, this looks dope. Do you need help? And then joined Tendermint. Like, yeah, I was like, do you need help? I know how to code. We can like this looks cool. I joined Tendermint back in like early 20, like I think January 2017. And then sort of started building from there on out. So like I really started off in the Ethereum community, then like went sort of the pure consensus route down towards fast finality. And my basic thesis always has been that like it seems unlikely that there will be a single global security model. Because I find the UN terrifying. I think everyone that like wants more centralized governments, they're all statists. And I think like you want to be sovereign, right? Like you want to have many levels of sovereignty, and you want to have the ability to like pick your level of sovereignty and like be able to exit from these systems. So I was never that a single consensus system never appealed that much to me, because I think they're easily capturable no matter how decentralized they are. Like if Bitcoin is the only thing out there in existence, that seems just terrifying. I think that 99% of everyone of the industry agrees with this, by the way, because I think no one here goes like, should we have a really decentralized one world government? Does that sound like a good idea to you? And like no one says yes to that. So like it was always about like giving users choice, having the ability to move assets around, having like these very interoperable systems. Then just build up Tenement from the ground up. Started one of the very first validator companies back in 2017, like end of 2017. And like again, people who weren't around then really don't remember this, but like people thought we were crazy. Like proof of stake was not a thing that any reasonable person thought was going to work. Everyone was very skeptical. Even PBFT was very skeptical. Like everyone was like, well, maybe we should have like things like Cadena, Nakamoto consensus, these kinds of things. And so I built up one of the very first validator companies because there was nothing around. And in that move, I also moved to Switzerland because I figured, like where do you store hotkeys with lots of money on them? Well, the Swiss Alps historically seemed like a very good place to do this. I need a new place to live anywhere because I was just like pinging around. It's like at some point you want to have at least like some closet where you can put things, right? So moved to Switzerland. We ran everything on physical hardware in the Alps as like I think the only validator. It was cool, but also very annoying. I now understand why AWS exists. Your physical hardware is like fun for 6 months, and after that you go like, fuck me, I should have not racked my own servers. This was a terrible idea. And then like from that all spiraled. And then really like this all ended up in Anoma, because in the summer of 2020, me and my two co-founders were pretty depressed on the state of crypto. Because everyone was like doing the same thing. It's like, well, let's like copy these 3 smart contracts to this new thing, and for some reason this is like going to make my parents want to like use these systems, or it's like going to advance on sort of like some fundamental criteria. And so out of this came Anoma, which was really the idea that users had intents, they didn't have transactions. Like no one ever has a transaction unless you go to a store to buy some milk with Bitcoin, because then like your Bitcoin transaction, true, that's a transaction, but like the other side of the trade is settled in the physical world. So in the digital world, pretty much everyone that wants to like trade an asset, or like, I want to be part of this multi-sig, I want to be part of this public goods funding effort. These are all intents. They're not transactions. They're not directly settable in consensus. It made no sense to like dump all of these things in consensus because it was highly inefficient. And so that was the first key insight. The second key insight was like, you really need decentralized counterparty discovery. So like, how do you discover other people with whom to do things? It's like Uniswap, like to Hayden's credit, right? Uniswap is like the smartest way to do this on chain. We have an AMM that's just like the central counterparty for everything. This does not scale. This does not is very hard to generalize. It's super inefficient because we have to like dump all our intents for some reason consensus. But you needed some way, you need some way to discover who are the other parties that I want to interact with. And then also like, how do I do multi-step proving, multi-step composing effectively? Like where I have an intent from A to B, you have something B to C, I can collapse it into A to C, and then at some point later, someone else can come along to actually finalize this. And this led into this really interesting third thing, which was privacy guarantees. Like, generally, like we saw this trend of like everything was going to be ZK-ified. And it really means, not even on the privacy side, but also on the computational compression side, that data moves to edge devices. It's like, right, like instead of having this like large data blob in the middle, you end up in a world where, well, all our phones kind of like hold a lot of our personal data on them directly, and only on demand do we then reveal things when we actually need to coordinate with other people. And so intents really fit really well into the ZK world, where you do proofs over local data, then how do you composable proofs? So like I prove over my local data, you prove over your local data, someone else combines this. And this is, I think, also the fundamental unlock that is actually going to happen, which is none of the ZK tech really works without intents, because unless we are willing to tolerate having a single central prover that just does everything for us, you need individuals to have the ability to reason over their own, to make statements over their own local data. And sort of more on a practical perspective, I was terrified of financial systems that were fully transparent. I like cash. I'm from Germany. Like in Germany, the East German Stasi is still like a very vivid memory. Having fully transparent government-owned payments rail seems like a bad idea. So I think on a very human level, good privacy guarantees are going to just be needed, because otherwise the world will look terrifying.
Yeah. I think that you brought up several good points with regards to the state of kind of the transaction-based paradigm that we're living in right now in crypto, which has its certain set of trade-offs. But what I'd like to kind of further understand from your perspective to lay the foundation here, I think that you guys may have a different definition, or at least your own definition of like what intents are with regards to the way that Anoma works. Maybe you could just illuminate how you are thinking about what this intent-centric paradigm looks like, what Anoma's kind of definition of this intent engine really is. I think that'll help lay the groundwork for the listeners as well as for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, let's see. So intents are just partial state transitions. That's sort of at the simplest level, it's a partial state transition. It's like, I have some state A and I'd like to be in state B. And generally, in order to settle this, someone else needs to be in state B and wants to be in state A. You can think of this in a very specific example, like a trade. I have some ETH that I want to trade for Bitcoin. You have some Bitcoin that you want to trade for ETH. Those two things individually are partial state transitions. Once you combine them, that forms a transaction that can be settled somewhere. This, of course, sort of like extends. This is not limited to directly two intents. This can be n intents. And again, two intents can compose into another intent. So if I have some ETH for Bitcoin and you have some Bitcoin for Sol, for example, this intent can be collapsed into ETH for Sol. And I don't have to care whether there's one other intent, 100 other intents. And the other really important thing is, so this is all about state layout, and really like Anoma intents are just about state layout. Like in Anoma doesn't really care about like the specific instruction set or the specific message passing model, for example. Like when you think of the EVM does three things. It does like some sort of state layout, how you access contract data. It does some instruction set, as in like EVM bytecode, and it does some message passing model, as in like how do other contracts call into other contracts? Like how do contracts call into other contracts, right? And so in Anoma, intents are just focused on state layout. This is the only thing you have to agree on. If you agree on the state layout, you can use the EVM, you can use the SVM. I actually don't care. Whatever execution environment you want to use, you can do this. Anoma just really cares about the state layouts here. And this again can also mean that like an intent can be issued in zero knowledge if you want to. So like instead of attaching some like specific data to prove that you, so for example, like you own things in some state, you own some ETH. You are free to decide whether you are willing to reveal that you directly own the ETH, or you reveal a ZK proof that attests to the fact that you own the ETH. To the intents, this actually is completely transparent. Like they don't care. This is just like I currently have some state and I'd like to go to some other state and I have an authorization that I am allowed to make this transaction. Of course, the astute listeners will sort of realize that how do you get private intents? Like you need to find the counterparty. So if you want to find a counterparty, you have to reveal something. But you can be much more pragmatic about this. You don't have to like yell to the world that you're willing to trade these two assets at that size. You can go, let me first see who is willing to trade in this range, for example. And then you can sort of like do much more optional disclosure things where you reveal less. Or if we like the three of us in a room, we can just reveal to the three of us our intents and then just settle them in zero knowledge fully and not reveal anything else to the world.
Yeah.
I think that's quite important to realize with intents. The other thing is they're fully programmable. So like we're getting the same power that we got with Ethereum over Bitcoin, sort of like when we moved from Bitcoin to Ethereum, we're like, holy crap, I can like program. I'm not limited to Bitcoin script. And currently, like I think everyone is starting to think about intents a little bit more. Like in comparison, like 3 years ago, everyone thought we were crazy. But they're all still thinking on like, oh, like an intent is a limit order. That's just like, but that's very limited, right? It's like in Anoma, intents are just programmatic. Any code you can write, it's an intent. You want to do a trade that's dependent on like the US election and the weather in China at the same time. Sure. If you can write it in code, you can execute this kind of intent.
Yep. It's starting like the three pillars that you described and the way that you kind of outlined how this works from like a state perspective. It really sounds to me like almost like what Solana's calling network extensions, what Ethereum's calling rollups. It's almost like this intent machine. You guys are like building these programmable extensions for people to use within different ecosystems. And then simultaneously, you've been kind of taking the torch to copy and paste EVM L2, saying that kind of like there's not a lot of programmability upgrades here. There's not a lot of things going on that are really changing, that are kind of pushing the needle. How are you seeing this intent machine and this way that you're describing intents in relation to kind of other scaling solutions that you're seeing out there and kind of like the trade-offs between L2s and Anoma's design?
Yeah, so they're just different things, really. Anoma, it's a distributed operating system. It's a distributed intent-centric operating system. It's an intent machine. You can really think of this as it's kind of like Windows. Currently, we live in this world where everyone is running like these bare bones CPUs. Like everyone has their specific execution line. And as a developer, I got like, well, I either stick to the same CPU or I now like rewrite my entire application for this other CPU. Like if I go to the SVM, I now rewrite my entire application. And with Anoma, it doesn't matter which CPUs are running under the hood. If you can implement the operating system on top of the CPU, it just works. And so like your applications just become portable this way. Plus, it networks all these different CPUs together. I think the reason why people get a little bit not confused, but like why they think like rollups and network extensions are kind of similar to like require intents because, well, intents are like when you think of what intent is, right? Like I have A to B, someone else is B to C. I do this 100 times, and then sort of the loop closing the loop is then a sequencer signature that makes this entire thing settleable on an L1. And so really like intents are just rollups on demand. Like this is what you can build with intents. It's just on-demand rollups. They just like come for free because like the architecture allows for this. That you can say, well, if we have 100 people that all like want to have some sort of sequential state transition, we can collapse this all into one bit of compute. And this is the nice thing. Like Anoma is incredibly flexible. Anoma does this thing that is really hard and that no one else wants to tackle on like how do you give stable developer APIs to people? How do you network all these many different things together? Like to me, it's really a user choice. Like where does a user want to keep their valuable state? Do they want to keep it on L1? Do they want to keep it on L2? That's the hard question. Like who secures your state? Who like provides like long-term data retrieval guarantees for your state? And this is really like the battle on the L2 side, I think that I have like no stake in, which is it seems that like there are many places where nowadays I can like offload my data to, And Anoma doesn't try to compete with this. I think this is like, whether it's useful to have yet the same VM in a slightly different color at a slightly different speed on a centralized server, it's very questionable to me. I don't know. Like, to me as a developer, I can do exactly the same thing. I want to be able to do new things. I want to be able to do new things also as a user, where I can say, well, honestly, here's my program. Here's my intent. I would like to trade some ETH for DAI. I don't actually care whether it gets settled on Ethereum mainnet, on Optimism, Arbitrum. Just give me whatever is quickest or cheapest, right? Like, and this is the kind of level of abstraction that I'd like to be able to use, and I think that's going to unlock the next 10x, because it gives you something new, where like you all of a sudden you start writing against the operating system, and you go like, well, users pick their security preference, execution preferences, and then the system figures out how to get them this, right? I think this is sort of the position we're coming from. The other thing is, it's all about the state. It's all about the data. Like, rollups aren't scaling solutions if you define scaling solutions very strictly. Because like in the past, we always defined scaling solutions as like, we want to have some amount of, like, we wanted to have constant cost on the L1 and for infinite user interaction on sort of like in a scaling solution. This is not currently true. Like, you're still bounded by how much data you can push onto the L1. And this is really like onto some other DA, but like, it's fundamentally bounded, right? And so I gave this great talk. At least I liked it. I think it was a fun talk at PlasmaCon in Tokyo, like 3 weeks ago or so, where I talked about resource plasma, which is just this idea that the plasma constructions were correct, and that you want to enable everyone individually to hold their state. And this like starts looking a lot like intents again, where it's like, well, if everyone individually keeps their state, these systems become incredibly scalable, because we actually only need to verify the compute on these systems. There's no particular reason why the fact that that I have X amount of ETH needs to be tracked in some database on Ethereum. There's no reason for this. Like, we should have a single Merkle root to which I can prove I own some key in the system that like represents X amount of ETH, and I can like modify this key under some conditions. And then like we actually get to this constant scaling factor of like, there's just a couple of Merkle roots that we track on whatever security system we want. But like, scaling is completely unbounded from this, and like from time to time we just need to update the roots.
I think we've heard people sort of allude to this idea where state is localized to the user and not stored on some database somewhere. And people have had kind of fuzzy names for this, which is like user centric rollups, or a user centric view of the chain. And so, you know, the name of this podcast is the rollup. We tend to also believe that there's no central chain that is going to be like the one chain to rule them all. There's going to be a million chains. People kind of extend that, you know, to different orders of magnitude, but the kind of extreme example is that every user is its own rollup, and from what I'm hearing,
100% agree with this. Everyone is their own chain.
So could you kind of just expand on that a bit? Like, what does that mean in practice?
Yeah, so currently we live in this really weird abstraction world, right? Like, where there are chains, and then they have some RPC nodes, and like there's some full nodes that like serve RPCs, and then as a user I have like my RPC client, and I talk to this chain via some process, via some like RPC calls. And in an ideal case, I get light client proofs and so on, and I have some security considerations. But the first thing to realize is state should only be co-located if it's valuable together. Like, my personal data is not valuable if it's next co-located with Andy's data. That's no point. Like, so state only needs to be co-located if it's valuable together. As in, for example, if the three of us do regular trading, we should probably co-locate our state. But most people don't really do regular trading with a billion other people. Most people need co-located state for their local community. Like, when I think about my parents, they need like co-located state for their, like, with the people in their village. That's like 2,000 people kind of thing. They don't like, it doesn't, when every month they leave maybe, and then they like need to take some part of their state to some other system. where then co-location like has performance benefits. But generally speaking, like they need fairly localized state. And the other really important component here is we will not beat like you will not beat localized state or localized settlement unless you can violate the laws of physics and speed of light constraints, right? Like it is, and this is like I'm going to shit a little bit on the Solana on like speed of light things here, but like you can never build a faster Solana than we can do local settlement unless totally figures out to violate the laws of physics around speed of light, right? Because we always have to like around the globe consensus around the globe network hops. If the three of us are in a room, we should just do local area networking, and then sort of like figure out what we want to do and then settle this wherever we want to take the state. And so my view of the entire system is that it is much cleaner as an abstraction when you start thinking of users just as one-on-one chains.
Yeah.
That just have some data themselves, and maybe they sometimes want to move this data to Ethereum, and maybe then sometimes they want to move this data off Ethereum. And like, for example, if like we want to trade a bunch of assets, maybe we have to move a bunch of the data to Ethereum to be able to enable this kind of like synchronous trading, right? But most of the time, I'm very happy to secure my data locally. This also comes down to like my parents will never trust global Bitcoin or global Ethereum, no matter how decentralized. They will always trust the local community more. So they should keep their data with their local community. So I think this is the entire idea. Like once you start thinking of users as one-on-one chains, you break this weird distinction between this is a user and this is a chain, and you start arriving, well, all of these things are just controllers, and we call them controllers, which is really like consensus providers. They're controllers. They control some amount of state. It just controllers interacting with each other. And then how do we enable a number of controllers to be able to connect to each other, to like gossip data between them, so that, for example, if two users come together and just want to do like pairwise trading, they can just form an on-demand chain in the middle that they both move their data into, do the synchronous trading on that system, and then move it back out. Because global consensus is really expensive, right? And so, yeah, I think it's a much better abstraction to think of users as one-on-one chains, and they're just like chains talking to each other.
Yeah. Couple of things there. We had a podcast with Stefan from One Balance, and he was pretty adamant on global consensus being silly from the lens of like, listen, like if I'm going to go to Starbucks and buy a coffee, why does the whole world need to verify that this transaction was like accurate, done, and settled by a global distributed set of validators when it's a transaction that is so minuscule in the grand scheme of the broader transaction? So I think that thesis with regards to local consensus being more impactful, paired up with also another recent pod that we had with Ilya from Near, which was with regards to user-owned accounts. And kind of we were going back and forth on like this app chain thesis, and he's kind of like, no, you don't need app chains because Ethereum built it wrong, where they built it without interoperability first, whereas Cosmos kind of built it with interoperability kind of baked in from the beginning. Instead of doing it this way, you should just do kind of sharding and have every user account be its own kind of chain, its own kind of contract, and then have the applications and other users interact directly with that user's kind of contract or that user's chain. And so this trend I see happening, and I think that like some of the leaders in the space are pushing this idea forward. So from a more practical lens, how does Anoma push this forward from your perspective and kind of bring this together? Where does Anoma fit in this puzzle? Or even more broadly, like where does the concept of generalizable intents fit into this to make this a reality? Or how does that kind of play in?
Vertex Edge is now live on Say Network. Say users can now trade 50 plus spot and perp markets with the unified order book liquidity of Vertex Edge across Arbitrum, Blast, Mantle, and Say. The next 6 weeks, 850,000 Say tokens will be up for grabs as trading rewards every single week, exclusively on Say. Join Vertex on Say Network now on Vertex Edge. That's vertexprotocol.com.
Yeah, so where do I start there? I think, I agree with Stefan here. It's like, it's silly to say, and like close, like physically close doesn't really, like, that's not a hard requirement, but more like culturally close. This is always the way I think about it. Like, because you can cut these examples a number of ways. You could say, well, there should be like a Starbucks specific settlement system that handles all global Starbucks traffic. Or you like do a local economy specific cut where you go like, well, the economy in Zug gets its own settlement system. And like, actually both are valid. This is kind of the point, which is like, the people in World of Warcraft will do lots of activity between themselves, so they should have, even though they're geographically distributed, they should have like a logically co-located state effectively that represents all of World of Warcraft, because that's the state they do lots of tight interactions with, right? I think a little bit on the example with Ilya, it's like where like sharding does this to some extent, but like the thing is, it's still like a single global security model. And like, I'm still not convinced that this is the right call. Also, if it's near, like, this doesn't really change the idea that I still don't want a one world government in green.
Yeah, that was my pushback as well.
I don't know.
It's still like scaling a single state machine. It's just a different flavor. Like, I understand the core design principle, but like, it's not as appealing to me in theory as more kind of distributed networks and having, Ethereum as a settlement layer and scaling kind of horizontally, or even like the way that Cosmos SDK and Tendermint have built their models.
Yeah. And like, so how does this work specifically with Anoma? So Anoma is very agnostic to the specific security models that users care about. If all users want global Ethereum security, this is totally fine. This is fine. Like, I mean, I don't personally agree with like some of these choices, right? Like on the individual users. But if let's assume we live in a hypothetical world of like everyone wants global Ethereum, that's great. This like works super well with Anoma as well. It's just about having this ability to have heterogeneous trust zones that connect with each other. And so really like what this offers to users and developers is that it gives you this generalized intent where you can say, well, I'd like to do A for B. And I'd like to send it to like my local trusted solvers first. Like, and if they can't solve this within the first, 10 minutes, then this gets like free for all. And then anyone can start solving this, right? And it's like, or I only want to like talk to my 2 trusted friends to like see if they can trade me this NFT. And it's a lot about this flexibility in building networking stacks and like distributed system stacks that can like that aren't, because currently all these systems are designed as like single global consensus systems because they all started with this, and that's like fine, but it's very hard to pivot a single global consensus system into like, no, this is a very loosely connected heterogeneous trust model with a very with a completely novel like intent-centric execution environment with the intent machine, right? And so our approach has always been, if users want to use Ethereum, that's amazing, right? Like I use Ethereum for like probably like 85 to 90% of the things I do, because like this is my preferred community to hang out with and have my assets secured. But I just want like Anoma on Ethereum. And then I can put Anoma also like on an L2, just the intent machine. And now like on like Optimism and Ethereum, the validators or the full nodes can decide to run small sidecars effectively, which are just processes. And like here you have all the flexibility on like, you can connect to the same P2P stack so that I can gossip just raw transactions to one P2P stack, and then the P2P stack figures out, well, this is designed for Optimism, this was destined for Ethereum. Or you can have a high-level integration where you start having the intent machine on Ethereum as well as on Optimism, and then you go, well, now I have this like expressive generalized intent, and maybe the most tight integration is that you get some amount of shared sequencing between these different these different trust zones. And so Anoma is really just designed like it plugs in also with like near, for example, or like one balance. It's like Anoma really is not competitive because it's like it's doing something that is very difficult, but I think it's going to be fundamentally the fundamental unlock to connect a lot of these currently separate systems together into a coherent execution environment as well as a coherent, not execution environment, like a coherent operating system. That like, as a developer, I just build applications, and when a user wants to move to a new system, I just have to build the operating system once for this new system, and then all applications just work. And as a user, I don't have to pick whether I always want to be that like don't make a fundamental choice like I can only be on Ethereum. I can never be on a rollup. But as a user, I can just say, well, I currently have some state on Ethereum mainnet. I'd like to have some state on L2. I describe this as an intent. I send this to the same common P2P stack, and then solvers can just figure this out, right? And this is really the way I think about this for like how Anoma interfaces with sort of a lot of the existing infrastructure. And I think this is sort of the hardest thing because everyone asks me like, oh, isn't it competitive to X or Y? I'm like, no. Like Anoma actually just tries to do something that's very needed because like this is a fundamental need of like how do we defragment a lot of the state that's on all these random things. And everyone else is just currently building like another execution environment. It's like I have no interest in this. We have like 500 of them, and it's very unclear that we need 500 of them because I mostly care about local things. So yeah.
Yeah, and the way to fix the state fragmentation issue is actually to like fragment it way more and then tie all the pieces together. And so Vitalik put out an article the other day, glue and coprocessors, and that's sort of the way that I'm thinking about this because Anoma provides that generalizable intent framework for these different applications, coprocessors, data hubs in order for them to communicate with one another. And so you started to get into how Anoma communicates with some of the existing architecture. Are there any infrastructure changes that are required? Like, do we need all users to have their own account in order for Anoma to sort of mesh and merge that data together? Or can we start by Anoma as the glue between rollups, and then we can start to use Anoma as data starts to go more into these user-owned accounts? Then we can use Anoma to tie those together.
Yeah, I should have to explain this a little bit better, I think. There's no central Anoma user account. There's no like central Anoma chain that you must interact. I think these are like kind of like I have some amount of problems with the chain abstraction thesis and movement here because I think it's always like, let's just like build it yet another layer of abstraction that everyone must sit at in terms of data and state. There's no Anoma chain you need to interact with. Like if you just want to use Anoma as an environment on Ethereum, great. No Anoma chain ever required, just like directly use this on Ethereum. If you just want to be two rollups that connect, Anoma is just sort of like this P2P substrate, this execution, right, this operating system that you can leverage to do this. So there is no really like, we don't have to, and I also think this is like a terrible deployment strategy when you actually think about it, because this is kind of like what we had with the L1 wars, where everyone went like, or even the L2 wars right now, where everyone goes, well, move your valuable piece of state to my new shiny thing and it will fix all your problems. Yeah, like that's not going to happen. Like, so, and with Anoma, it's much more, well, the infrastructure comes to you where you already have valuable state. If over time, there's maybe a local Anoma chain because you do lots of things in World of Warcraft and you want to have this like unified, like optimized CPU for your World of Warcraft consensus instance. Yeah, maybe you decide to like move some state into sort of an Anoma native CPU run by the World of Warcraft community. But this is very much like an optional eventual thing. It's not everyone like just generate your new account over here and we will like direct everything from your new account. So the onboarding path just looks much easier in my opinion, where it's like the state can remain where it is and like moving the state is actually the hard part. So like it's much easier to bring infrastructure to state than to bring state to infrastructure.
Yep. So it reminds me of some of these different players of the chain abstraction landscape that are doing, you could say like permissions or orchestrations, where it's kind of like this idea of facilitating different cross-chain and multi-chain transactions, different types of interactions across a variety of execution environments. Where you guys fit in appears to be more at the application kind of layer, if you will, where actually we got in trouble for asking, we were trying to figure out where to put Anoma on this map that we did. And like, there was no category for
I saw
Anoma.
that map and was like, order flow actions is not it, mate.
Yeah. So what was wrong with the map, or better yet, okay, so let's just start with your view of chain abstraction. Like, what is the chain abstraction stack to you? How is this going to work? What is your vision for this chain abstraction? Let's start with the bare bones, then you can roast us for the map, and then we can kind of discuss how this is going to kind of play out.
Yeah, so I think I don't think like users should still know which chains they're on. This is never going to go away because the chains are what the things that secure their state. Like it's very important that you understand where your state is because that's your fundamental security model, right? Like you can never live in a world where you go like, well, my state lives somewhere, but I'm fully abstracted on this like super abstracted chain, and like my state now lives on like two data centers, like two servers somewhere centrally, right? Like users need to fundamentally care about this. Otherwise, this is going to be horrendously insecure and people lose tons of money, right? So the way I think about this is more, we want to give users the ability to, it's not chain abstraction in that sense. It's more like we want to build, like there's an operating system abstraction so that users can go, that like applications can roam. I always like to use the example of mobile phones. Like my phone that I bought, actually, I think I bought this in the States, in New York. Like I can use this in Switzerland. This is amazing. I can use this in China. I can use this in Australia. I can use this wherever I go. It's actually quite nice. But this only works because we have like we agreed on the base layer protocols for how phones interact with the network. And so I think of this much more like this is the kind of operating system. Like I can take my Word program and decide that I want to run this on a Mac or on a Power PC or on some like esoteric CPU, wherever like, for example, Windows just runs, my application runs. And this is what I want for users. That users go like, well, I would like to do some trading. And I can take this like trading capability to a number of different chains, and I don't have to worry about like reprogramming my like device or my application on my phone to work against this new chain. I just get a common abstraction, but users still know about which chains they're on because this is the value these systems provide. Like if users don't know that they're on a chain or which chain they're on, this just seems like the easiest way for people to lose tons of money because they start moving into insecure systems. And this is very different than like, I think people think about this kind of abstraction as like, well, we want to hide this complexity from users. And like, no, this is like the fundamental thing. You can do this for servers maybe, because you can go like, well, whether this is in this AWS data center or that AWS data center probably makes very little difference. But whether you're on Terra or whether you're on Ethereum makes a ton of difference. And you should better know this as a difference. Like this is going to be problematic if users do not know this difference anymore.
Okay, so that's kind of your general worldview of chain abstraction, which I think there's a lot of points that we've heard and agree with. And I think some with regards to users caring, I think there's room to disagree with regards to like some users just may want to have security, but may not care if it's base optimism or arbitrum, or if it's, X, Y, and Z. The chains themselves have very similar security models. They might not care exactly about the name or the dynamic of the community.
Oh, I fully agree with that, by the way. Like, to some extent, if you can like abstract security away and go like, well, these four systems have roughly the same security, then users can just pick. Like, this is kind of why intents are nice, because you can also say, I'm willing to be in any security environment that has at least 100 validators, with no validator, with like no more than the top 10 validators owning 2/3 of the stake, right? Like, and this is kind of like the way to do this, I think. I
think it's on the applications, maybe like Intents provides you with this constrained set of tasks, right? Like that's the key breakthrough of Intents, is like you get these restrictions almost. So if solvers are only operating within a certain set of long tail L2s or chains or whatever it is, then you can kind of have these public disclosures as to like different levels. And I see like almost to a certain extent where you go on like Robinhood or something and you can choose like conservative, aggressive, or medium. There could be a path where like you could choose what apps you're using on different chains based on like a certain risk tolerance. And perhaps that's provided by these apps or by the solvers in some UX capacity.
I could see that. Actually, that'd be interesting.
Could be like different.
I have to say, like the Robin Hood thing is like, conservative or aggressive, and the difference is like may get hacked, but probably won't get hacked.
So we put out this market map, and for those who are just listening on Spotify or on the website, we have the map up here that's pinned on our X profile, and yeah, I think we fucked up Anoma's right in the middle. Beautiful. I think that's the old logo. So 2 fuck ups here. But maybe you could describe what order flow, sources, and auctions means to you, and what that is, and then why Anoma may or may not fit there. And then perhaps if Anoma was to be somewhere else on the map, where you kind of see it.
Yeah. I think order flow is really like, how do you, and order flow sources and auctions is like, order flow tends to originate from users. So this tends to be like high level apps. This tends to be like Uniswap. That's the source of order flow. And then these auctions on like, how do you auction off this order flow? I'm not a big fan of this idea that we've made MEV in like an inevitable component, rather than a bug to like fix. Because why does lots of MEV exist? Well, it exists because you sign over an execution trace, not over a state update. Like, and so, I mean, if you come from computer science, you will know that like, depending on how you interleave your database updates, they will result in or depending on how you
Adrian,
interleave
real quick, sorry, could you just define an execution trace? Really fast?
Sorry. So an execution trace is, think of it as like a recipe, like a smart contract on Ethereum is an execution trace. You go first do this, then do this, like 2 + 2, make the CryptoKitty blue, send it somewhere, right? Like it's like you go step by step and you execute it that way. And you must know exactly which compute you want to run. This is actually kind of difficult, and a number of bugs stem from this problem that like you define that like these are execution traces. And what actually happens when a user sends a transaction on Ethereum, they don't sign over a specific state update. They sign over an execution trace. They go like, this is my entry point, and this contract is allowed to like run its individual steps, and I get some state afterwards. Like you can simulate it, and you kind of know what kind of state you're getting, but you don't get an in-protocol guarantee. Whereas with a generalized intent, you sign over the specific future state. And then you don't care, like whether there's like there's like a ZK proof involved, or that it's going via an AMM to compute the eventual state. This is, by the way, the really big unlock for Anoma intents, which is you sign over state updates. You do not sign over execution traces. Because again, if you sign over an execution trace, you must kind of know which other counterparties you're interacting with, because you need to call them in your execution trace. So they must be piped in. Whereas in Anoma, you can go, well, I have A for B, someone that gives me the other side of the thing. Yeah, that's settleable. And then, so in protocol, you just check, did the updates adhere to the signed state updates? As in, like, are the state updates like fulfilled or violated? And if it's violated, you reject the update. So this is the way I think of the way to think of execution traces. And so a lot of teams have started like designing around, well, we have all this order flow that's really an execution trace that I can interleave in various ways. Let's try to monetize this by like auctioning off the ability to fuck ordinary users. Is this a good idea? I'm not sure. No one likes the fact that Citadel does this with Robinhood. Like, I don't know. It seems bad. And Anoma doesn't provide this. Anoma just provides, and this is a little bit, I think, the problem with this map. Like, honestly, the right answer to this problem is like the background, the like black background color should just be Anoma colored, because Anoma provides like hooks into all these different components. It's not just a simple one thing. And like, it's not just selling your order flow. It's not just like providing you an execution environment or consensus system. It's like, how do you get a sort of like fully fledged operating system that you can deploy on many different settlement layers? And then how do you have the infrastructure to connect all these things? And then how can solvers read this data, compute some sort of like transactions and settle them then wherever the users want to settle them? And so, for example, like solvers can also be used for orchestration here, because I can have an intent that says this is only valid in a month from now. And if in a month from now you claim it, like you execute this, you can claim, I don't know, 0.01 ETH. Right? And so that means that now I'm just pricing data availability costs on like, is someone willing to keep around my intent for 1 month in exchange for 0.01 ETH? And so like Anoma also provides this kind of orchestration. But again, it's like people always think of these systems as like as tokens, as like, oh, like I must have like, this is my price pony, and like you must write my price pony kind of somewhere. And I charge you fees for this. And like Anoma isn't this. Anoma is just like, there's infrastructure and you are free to use it. Please go ahead and like use it, right? It's not like there's an Anoma chain you must interact with. Or like there's a network, a specific RPC you must talk to.
Yeah.
On this diagram, I think the sort of most preferred thing is like probably settlement and infra, because this is like, I think, where it has a very big impact, where it just like provides very good execution guarantees to people. And like, for example, like, and standards maybe. And like solver networks, for example, right? Like that's just like, it's an application. It's a thing that you build on top of Anoma. For example, like Suave, or like even Iori. It's like something that just like integrates super well with Anoma, because it's like not the same as Anoma. It's like they just provide a specific standard for like how solvers can sort of coordinate with each other. And Anoma provides a lot of like the backing P2P infrastructure. And again, then on like permissions, orchestrations, like, yeah, a little bit, but I don't like the phrasing that like there's like, we all get this like central account and the central account coordinates all my things. That's like, I wanted this for decentralized things, not like trust yet another intermediary, even if the intermediary is centralized. My theme is like self-sovereign infrastructure, and like people should be capable of running their own stuff. I don't want to have to delegate this.
We'll make sure for the next map we send you the invoice for the logo to be on the entire background. We'll send the signature block for the allocation as well. All right, buddy? Thanks for your fucking recommendation, sir. God damn, dude. Can't please anybody these days, huh? My goodness.
I do like these graphics. I think they provide a good intro, especially because I mean, there's just a lot of stuff happening nowadays. And like, yeah, it's nice that at least someone takes the time to go through all the different things. Because I think not enough people actually like, try to understand how all these things fit together.
Yeah, our graphic designer has a lot of fun with them too.
Rob, what you got for us?
Let's take some time to talk about Namada.
Okay.
Launching today, in and around when this is going to be posted, and I think it hits on a lot of the ideological things that we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast: the sovereign thesis, the no central chain, no central prover. The privacy elements, the local consensus elements as well. And so let's just start broad, and then we'll dive into maybe start to tie some associations to some of the other concepts we were talking about.
Welcome to the Ignition, Mantle's newest campaign to liberate the growth power of Bitcoin. FBTC Ignition has officially begun with a total token supply of over 2,000 FBTC with a TVL of over 150 million. Right now, you can go on the FBTC website to see all of the featured campaigns, staking opportunities, and liquidity pools where you can utilize FBTC on-chain today for some of the best yields available on L2s. The Ignition Sparkle campaign can be found at fbtc.com/ongoing-campaign.
Yeah, I can give you a quick intro to Namada. I mean, Namada was a problem that I had, that I think a number of us have, which is I sometimes send money to people in crypto, and it's very annoying if they all can correlate each other and like all the services and like the various people can exactly tie this all back to me. And I think, so I do the same thing that I think most of us do, which is we like use a centralized exchange to give us new addresses, and we effectively use like, I mean, Coinbase is the single largest mixer in the world. So it's like Kraken Binance, and like it's not a problem, right? But like just very fundamentally, I think a lot of people use this way. And so to me, always the problem became I wanted some amount of privacy guarantees that existed for assets that are already held. Like it always seemed very nonsensical to tie this to specific asset classes or monetary policies. And so how do you have something that's fully asset agnostic? And at the time when we started Namada, this was really like, it was a personal problem. It's like something that the Anoma community, like a number of us in the Anoma community really deeply care about, like the ability to experiment with some sort of like data protection guarantees, data flow guarantees, privacy guarantees, right? And so Namada was really like the early Anoma community trying to experiment, like what does this actually look like? Because we haven't really seen this in practice, in sort of like a fully asset agnostic way. And this is really starting, it's really taking a life of its own. I mean, the Namada community is huge right now. Like you said, this will come out when Namada launches. Like, cool. I don't know. The validators are setting up the network. Like, I'm not involved in that. I'm not running a validate. I'm not running a node. I hope they know what they're doing.
Yeah, but there's been some butting of heads going on. What's going on there? What's people are upset.
Yeah, I think people like. I think we tried something radical, and this is actually much more technologically driven than even. Well, it's a little bit of both. I think. I think the butting of heads you're referring to is a little bit around sort of like no locks, full unlocks. This is impossible to do in a privacy preserving way. So if you actually want to have a good privacy preserving system or data flow, data privacy preserving system, this is very difficult. You like to build this, and I know of no system that has this. I know of a couple of systems that have like some contracts off chain that say like, oh, please don't move your assets around. But this is very difficult to build if you have a multi-asset shielded set, right? And this is sort of the first technical reason. And honestly, if someone wants to propose this, please go ahead. Like this is all open source. Like propose a different schedule to the community and see what happens there. And I think this is honestly always my answer. Like these are decentralized systems. And I think over time we've lost this ethos. But like I remember very vividly when we stood up Cosmos and Tezos and like Polkadot, Kusama. And like some of these were more centralized than others. And like Cosmos was by far the most decentralized network launch. But these are like fundamentally like these are communities. Like if you don't like something, like propose something. It's not just, and like especially with the L2s that are, I mean, practically they just look very centralized. I think sort of the community, like people right now sort of expect that this is like clean cut as a product built by a central organization. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I care about decentralization, so these things actually end up being decentralized. I don't really want to be in charge of running a server that does a thing for you. These are community projects, these are community owned. So my answer has always been like, if you don't like something, change it, right? Like, because this is how I got into the space. The other social thing on like whether lockups make sense, I don't know. It seems unlikely that they're like net positive because they just skew the market incentives and just bleed the market in. Like they split the market incentives over a longer period of time. And to me, it always seemed like, for example, when Cosmos like launched, it was pretty cheap at launch, like for a while. And so like it's allowed a bunch of early entrants. Like same for Ethereum. Like you don't actually like this high FTV, low float meta is horrendous. And everyone agrees here, but everyone goes like, yeah, we should keep doing this because like everyone is currently like, the VCs are getting filthy rich over this matter of like high float, low float, high FTV. And I just don't think it is good for communities. The one interesting aspect that I didn't think about when thinking about this problem space a little bit is, you know, the one group of people that really benefits from this is professional airdrop farmers. Because the airdrops tend to be really liquid. And so if you run an airdrop farm, or like if you are now one of the hedge funds farming these airdrops, like you have all incentives to like keep the low float, high FTV meta going, right? Because you're like the one person that's unlocked, you like can sell faster than the VCs. And so like I think a lot of the sentiment is really driven by the fact that we have a very poor signal to noise ratio in the space at the moment, which is like dominated by, and like I get the economics, but if you are 200 people and like a start, like 200 people kind of like airdrop farming operation, like one Starknet airdrop is going to be your yearly income. Like, yeah, I get why you like these economics are kind of like why you like these economics. But overall, long term, I am pretty convinced that like these locks do nothing except like skew eventual results. And I mean, we see this. Like, is there a single thing that launched in the last 12 months that's not bleeding? I mean, like, I don't know, look at your favorite thing and go like, well, some people may like are up if they bought in the first like 2 days or so. I don't know, this doesn't seem healthy. It seems much better to sort of grow communities organically, because I mean, why are people so bullish on ETH? Like why? Like because when ETH was launched, it was cool, it was cheap, it was like we just hacked with it, like, and this was fun. I mean, this was like the thing, and like as a result, a bunch of people sort of like rode up the wave and are now really like deeply invested in Ethereum and the asset and the sort of user base and like the technology. And I think this is a much healthier way for communities to grow.
Yeah, I've been seeing some interesting research also around growth-based unlocks and growth-based vesting schedules, TVL, user count, metrics, things that that can basically alleviate the sell pressure of insiders because of the metrics are like really strong. And so it's like there's a fundamental reason, there's a fundamental kind of value to this token or to this asset, to this network.
Yeah.
And so kind of balancing that with the unlock schedule was interesting. Rob, do you have something else to add there?
No, I mean, I like that model as well, and it reminded me of KPI tokens that were around for a little while. I haven't seen those in quite a long time, but I think there's similarities, and it also seems to smooth out some of the dynamics that Adrian brought up.
Yeah, I mean, just as we kind of wrap, we talked kind of. I didn't mean to have the whole Namada section go into putting Adrian on the spot because he shat on our market map, but I guess the tides just kind of turned.
That was the return. I see.
But maybe you could just like allude to the importance of privacy from an ethos perspective for a couple of minutes, and then we can wrap, because I think that's the big unlock here.
Yeah. So I think when I think about data protection or privacy, it's like current systems have a lot of default data protection, right? Like my bank account isn't readable to the public. My bank does a reasonable job, sort of protecting me from leaking a lot of information towards the external world. And I just don't see these systems ever gaining tractions without this. Because fundamentally, like my parents will not want a system where their neighbors see how much money they make. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, there's no amount of yield farming I can promise them where they go, yes, I'm willing to give up my entire privacy to the rest of the world forever into eternity, right? Like that's not happening. So I think outside of like the airdrop farming, like shitcoin trading use cases, this is going to be a fundamental requirement. And Namada really is like, it's the first steps. Like, let's try this out. Let's see how this works in practice. Let's experiment with this, because really historically there has been very little done on this front. And so like over time, this is also why I think of like Namada is just the first project, or like it's an effort by the Anoma ecosystem to like start pushing this forward. Because over time, as we learn more, we can start also like integrating more into Namada, connecting these systems closely together, maybe have something like sort of what Namada is now proposing with, I think, shielded actions, so like cross-chain things where Namada provides a shielded set. And I think so. This is quite important. The other thing is, I think we should really be more worried about surveillance states than we are right now. I think there was sort of a long wave around like 2014 Cambridge Analytica, where everyone was very concerned about this, and then this died down. And like to me, this is not gone away. And I think to a large extent, the reason why Facebook was in this weird position where they could influence US elections was not because they were bad people, but because their business model fundamentally required it, right? Like they sold ads, and turns out that a bunch of people were just highest bidders for these ads. Like they sold the data they had. It was like they weren't acting unethically. They were acting within sort of the constraints of their business model. And so I think if we want to safeguard democracy, we just need better data protection systems so that people aren't put on the spot, like where a publicly traded company has to decide on like, do I like follow shareholder code and like maximize profit, or do I follow like human ethics and not try to sell all my data to third countries? And the other thing is on the self-sovereign infrastructure side, I live in Switzerland. I like Switzerland, right? Like I have no illusion that Switzerland is not prepared for a nation state attack in the digital world. Like the idea that the Swiss financial system will survive a dedicated onslaught by a dedicated actor is idiotic to believe. Like this system collapses immediately. and then you just leak a bunch of data to sort of foreign entities. And so I never think about data protection as against the government. I think about this as like data protection for national defense. I think that like every like person that cares about the local community should care about this, because these things are honeypots, and it is not like you want to protect this data, because like if your financial data fully leaks to some adversary, like you're in deep shit. So like I think about this as like data privacy, data protection for national defense, for community defense, and really like allowing people to like safeguard democracy. So, like in a fully transparent system, I think we're going to have a hard time. And I see the authoritarian trends in Europe. I'm like, well, let's pretend that we can build
Europe's
like
cooked.
super stable systems that definitely won't get captured. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. East Germany and the Stasi is really like only 40 years ago. I don't know. This like seems too recent to make this jump to like start going like, yeah, we definitely should trust these like totally competent bureaucrats in Brussels to like do the right thing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of us in the space share a similar ideology. Like, I mean, I've just been personally like outside of the US for the last 2 years or so, traveling around, and I feel more empowered just, not being in one country with one place and like just kind of moving around. And there's a lot of different ways that you can empower yourself, but I think privacy is one of the largest. And then having private on-chain assets is about as good as it gets from a financial standpoint in today's world.
Yeah,
So
and it will get better over time. And like in the future, we can start like once you start having intents, you can start building not just like transfers or like privacy preserving transfers, but you can also start building like privacy preserving voting systems. You can like do actually like privacy preserving public goods funding, things like this, where like I may not want to publicly admit that I'm like pro nuclear in Germany. And so like being able to do this like privately seems like a very good first step for me. So I'm very excited about this. And I think if we don't solve this, like we need to solve a bunch of things in this industry. And I'm really kind of worried that we're just running around in circles because no one is willing to tackle sort of like the hard distributed systems problems. And like, how do a lot of these systems connect to each other? How do we like get reasonable guarantees for end users? Everyone's like, yeah, I'll do the super quick EVM based rollup in red. And like, I like the EVM, but like, do we need another 500 rollups? I don't know. Seems like spend some engineering time on like something that like advances us a little bit forward. Like, if you keep doing the same thing as the next guy, we're probably not making much progress.
Yep. Thank you for your time, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, man. In a world of forks, you guys are building spoons. So kudos and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.